"Please don't hit me. I'm already hurt," cried the waitress. Then Undercover Millionaire did this. The diner was packed that Tuesday night, the kind of chaos where mistakes happen and tempers flare. Clara had been on her feet for 9 hours straight, her hands shaking as she balanced another tray of orders. She'd learned to move through pain quietly, to smile even when her body screamed for rest, to never let anyone see how close she was to breaking. But when the manager grabbed her wrist that night, his fingers digging into bruises that hadn't yet healed from another man's anger, something inside her cracked wide open. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, raw and trembling in front of the entire restaurant. "Please, don't hit me. I'm already hurt." The room went silent. Forks stopped midair. Conversations died. Every eye turned toward the corner booth where a man in a faded hoodie and worn jeans slowly stood up. His face was calm, but his eyes held something dangerous. "Let go of her," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Now," the manager sneered, tightening his grip. "And who are you supposed to be? Her knight in shining armor?" The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple ID card. The manager's face went from red to white in seconds. The man standing before him wasn't just another customer complaining about cold coffee. He was Daniel Reed, billionaire CEO and owner of every single restaurant in the chain, including this one. What happened next would change both their lives forever. Before we go any further, drop a comment right now telling me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because stories like this one, they don't just entertain, they remind us what it means to be human. Now let's get back to what happened that night. The manager's name was Richard, and he'd been running Haven's Diner like his own personal kingdom for 3 years. He was the type of man who smiled at corporate inspections and turned into someone else the moment the suits left. His grip on Clara's wrist was so tight that her fingers were starting to go numb, but she didn't pull away. She'd learned the hard way that fighting back only made things worse. Daniel took a step closer, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. He wasn't a large man, not in the way Richard was, but there was something about the way he carried himself that made people instinctively step back. Authority wasn't always about size or volume. Sometimes it was just about knowing exactly who you were and refusing to apologize for it. "I said let go," Daniel repeated, and this time his voice was quieter, which somehow made it more terrifying. Richard's hand dropped from Clara's wrist like he'd been burned. He tried to laugh it off, looking around at the other customers as if they were all in on some joke together. "Look, buddy, I don't know who you think you are, but this is between me and my employee. She spilled coffee all over a customer's shirt, and someone needs to take responsibility." "Actually," Daniel said, pulling his phone from his pocket and tapping the screen a few times, "according to the security footage I've been watching for the past hour, you spilled the coffee yourself when you bumped into her tray. Then you blamed her in front of everyone to save face." Richard's jaw clenched. A muscle twitched in his cheek. "Security footage? You've been watching security footage? Who the hell do you think you are?" Daniel held up his ID card again, this time high enough for everyone in the diner to see. It was simple, clean, with his name and title printed in raised letters. Daniel Reed, Chief Executive Officer, Haven's Hospitality Group. The color drained from Richard's face so fast he looked like he might pass out. His mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. Around them, customers were pulling out their phones, some recording, others texting frantically. One older woman near the window gasped and whispered to her husband, "That's him. That's the Daniel Reed. I saw him on the news last month." Clara stood frozen, her hand cradling her injured wrist. She couldn't process what was happening. The quiet man who'd been sitting in the corner booth for the past 2 hours, the one who'd ordered just a cup of black coffee and a slice of apple pie, was her boss's boss's boss. He owned everything: the building, the tables, the plates, even the uniform she was wearing. Daniel's eyes never left Richard's face. "You have exactly 10 seconds to apologize to her before I make a phone call that ends your career in this industry permanently." Richard's pride warred with his survival instinct. You could see it happening in real time, the way his face shifted from defiant to desperate. He turned to Clara, and for a moment she thought he might actually do it. might actually say he was sorry. But then his eyes hardened again. "She's been a problem since day one," he said, his voice rising. "Always late, always making mistakes, always needing special treatment. If anyone should apologize, it should be her for wasting everyone's time." Daniel pulled his phone up to his ear. "Janet, it's me. I need you to draft immediate termination paperwork for Richard Holbrook, manager of Haven's Diner Location 17. Effective immediately." "Yes, tonight. I'll explain later." He paused, listening. "And call security. I want him escorted from the premises within the next 5 minutes." Richard's face went from white to red. "You can't do this. I have rights. I'll sue. I'll go to the press. You can't just fire someone for disciplining an employee." "Actually," Daniel said, sliding his phone back into his pocket, "I can fire someone for harassment, for creating a hostile work environment, and for lying to my face. The coffee incident was just the final straw. I've been watching you for 2 weeks, Richard. I've seen how you talk to your staff. I've seen you cut their hours without warning, schedule them for doubles without breaks, and pocket the cash tips that should have been split with the kitchen. Should I keep going?" The diner was so quiet you could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the back. Richard looked around desperately, as if someone might come to his defense, but every face he saw was cold. Even the other servers, who'd been too afraid to stand up to him before, were looking at him like he was a stranger. "You should leave now," Daniel said quietly, "before this gets any uglier than it already is." For a moment, Richard looked like he might argue. His hands balled into fists at his sides, and his breathing got faster. But then something in Daniel's expression must have convinced him that fighting would only make things worse. He turned on his heel and stormed toward the kitchen, probably to grab his things. Daniel waited until he was gone, then turned to Clara. Up close, she looked even more fragile than he'd thought. Her eyes were red-rimmed, probably from crying earlier, and there were dark circles under them that spoke of too many sleepless nights. Her uniform was clean but worn, the kind of worn that comes from being washed too many times because you can't afford to buy a new one. "Are you okay?" he asked, and his voice was gentler now, the hard edge gone. Clara nodded, then shook her head, then nodded again. She didn't seem to know what she was supposed to say. "I'm fine," she finally managed, but her voice cracked on the last word. "You're not fine," Daniel said, "and you don't have to pretend you are. Not here, not with me." Tears welled up in her eyes again, but she blinked them back furiously. "I can't afford to lose this job," she whispered. "I know Richard was terrible, but at least it was a job. At least it paid the bills. If you're going to fire me too, just do it quickly, okay? I don't think I can handle dragging it out." Daniel looked genuinely confused. "Fire you? Why would I fire you? Because I caused a scene. Because I made a customer uncomfortable. Because I didn't just keep my mouth shut and take it like I was supposed to." The words tumbled out faster now, like a dam breaking. "That's what everyone always says, right? Just keep your head down, don't make waves. Be grateful you have a job at all." "Clara," Daniel said, and the way he said her name, like it mattered, like she mattered, made something inside her chest tighten. "You didn't cause a scene. Richard did. You were the victim of workplace harassment, and instead of protecting you, he tried to blame you for his mistakes. That's not okay. That's never going to be okay, not in any business I run." She stared at him, not quite believing what she was hearing. In her experience, bosses always sided with other bosses. The people at the top always protected each other, and the people at the bottom were just collateral damage. "I want you to take the rest of the night off," Daniel continued, "with full pay. And tomorrow, I want you to come back, not as a waitress, but as a witness. I'm going to need detailed statements from everyone on Richard's behavior, and I want to start with you. Can you do that?" Clara nodded slowly. "But who's going to cover my tables? We're already short-staffed, and if I leave now, the other girls will have to work even harder." Daniel glanced around the diner. Several of the other servers were hovering nearby, clearly trying to look busy, while actually eavesdropping on every word. "You," he said, pointing to a young woman with short red hair and tired eyes. "What's your name?" "Jen," she said nervously. "Jen, how much does Clara usually make in tips on a Tuesday night?" Jen glanced at Clara, then back at Daniel. Maybe $60, sometimes $70 if we're really busy. Daniel pulled out his wallet and counted out 5 $20 bills. He handed them to Clara. Here's for tonight. And Jen, you and the rest of the staff split Clara's tables. Any tips you make off them you keep. I'll cover the difference from my own pocket. Jen's eyes went wide. Seriously? Seriously. And effective immediately, all Haven's locations are implementing a new tip-sharing policy that actually makes sense. No more managers skimming off the top. No more unfair distributions. Everyone who earns it, keeps it. He raised his voice slightly so the whole diner could hear. And if anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me directly. My email is on the company website. There was a moment of stunned silence, and then someone started clapping. It was the older woman by the window, the one who'd recognized Daniel earlier. Her applause was slow and deliberate, and one by one, other customers joined in. Soon the whole diner was clapping, and a few people were even cheering. Clara stood there with $100 in her hand, more money than she'd made in tips all week, and she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She settled for something in between, a weird, choked sound that made Daniel look concerned. "Hey," he said softly, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's okay. You're okay. Just breathe." She took a shaky breath, then another. The kindness in his voice was almost harder to handle than Richard's cruelty had been. She'd built walls around herself to survive the cruelty, but kindness slipped right through those walls like water through cracks in concrete. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You don't even know me." Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Because someone should have done it a long time ago," he finally said. "Because I built this company to create opportunities, not to give bullies a platform. And because when I heard you say I'm already hurt, something inside me broke. Nobody should have to say those words at their workplace. Nobody." Security arrived then, 2 men in dark uniforms who looked uncomfortable being there. Daniel spoke to them quietly, pointing toward the kitchen where Richard had disappeared. They nodded and headed back to retrieve him. "I should go," Clara said, suddenly feeling overwhelmed by everything. The attention, the money, the sheer impossibility of what had just happened. "Thank you for everything. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't have to repay me," Daniel said. "But if you want to do something for me, go home, get some rest, and come back tomorrow ready to tell me the truth about what it's really like to work here. No sugarcoating, no holding back. I need to know what's broken so I can fix it." Clara nodded, clutching the money tightly in her fist. She started to turn away, then stopped. "Mr. Reed?" "Daniel," he corrected. "Just Daniel." "Daniel, then. Why were you here? Really? Billionaires don't usually eat at diners in this part of town." He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Because I heard rumors that one of my suppliers was mistreating staff at several locations. I wanted to see for myself if they were true. Turns out they were worse than I thought." "So you came undercover." "I came as a customer. There's a difference. When you're the boss, people perform for you. They show you what they think you want to see. But when you're just another person sitting in a booth, you see the truth." Clara thought about that for a moment. "What you saw tonight, with Richard and me, that wasn't the worst of it, you know. There were other things. Things he did when he thought nobody was watching." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then I definitely need to hear your story tomorrow. All of it." She nodded and walked away, her steps a little steadier than they'd been before. Daniel watched her go. This woman who'd whispered her pain so quietly and still somehow demanded the world listen. When she was gone, he turned to find every eye in the diner still on him. He cleared his throat awkwardly. "I apologize for the disruption to your evening," he said. "Your meals tonight are on the house, and I hope you'll give us another chance to serve you under better management." Another round of applause, this time more enthusiastic. Daniel offered a small smile and a wave, then headed back to his corner booth. His coffee was cold now, and his pie was half eaten, but he sat down anyway. Jen approached tentatively, carrying a fresh pot of coffee. "Can I warm that up for you, Mr. Reed?" "Daniel," he said. "And yes, please." She poured carefully, her hand only shaking a little. "What you did for Clara, that was really something. She's been through a lot, more than most people know." "Tell me," Daniel said. Jen glanced around, making sure no one was listening too closely. She got out of a bad relationship about 6 months ago. Really bad. The kind where you have to change your locks and sleep with a chair under the doorknob. She came here because she needed work fast, and Richard hired her because he knew desperate people don't complain. Daniel's expression darkened. Did he know about her situation? Oh yeah, he knew. That's why he picked her. Clara, me, most of the girls who work here, we all have some kind of story. Single moms, runaways, recovering addicts, abuse survivors. Richard liked it that way, said it kept us grateful. She said the last word with bitter emphasis. Not anymore, Daniel said quietly. That ends tonight. Jen looked at him for a long moment, like she was trying to figure out if he was for real. You know, I've worked in restaurants for 15 years. I've seen a lot of bosses come and go, but I've never seen one stand up for us like you just did. Most of them just look the other way. Then most of them shouldn't be bosses, Daniel said simply. She smiled, a real smile this time. You want anything else? Pie's on me. I'm good, thank you. But Jen, tomorrow when Clara comes in, make sure she feels safe. Make sure everyone knows that what happened tonight was the beginning of things changing, not the end of her employment. I will, Jen promised. And Daniel, thank you. Not just for Clara, for all of us. He nodded, and she walked away to tend to other tables. Daniel sat alone with his fresh coffee, watching the diner slowly return to normal. Conversations resumed, laughter bubbled up here and there, and the kitchen went back to clattering out orders. But he couldn't stop thinking about Clara's face when she'd said those words. Please don't hit me. I'm already hurt. The fear in her eyes, the resignation, the terrible familiarity of it all. She'd said it like she'd said it before, maybe many times before, to someone who hadn't listened. Daniel pulled out his phone and typed a quick email to his assistant. Janet, I need a full audit of all Haven's locations, focusing on management practices, employee satisfaction, and any reports of harassment or misconduct. I want it on my desk by the end of the week. Also, set up a confidential hotline where staff can report problems anonymously. Fund it personally if you have to, not through the company budget. And find me the best employment attorney in the state. I have a feeling we're going to need one. He hit send and sat back, rubbing his eyes. He'd built Haven's hospitality from nothing, starting with a single food truck and growing it into a chain of 37 locations across 3 states. He'd always believed he was doing good, creating jobs, supporting communities, building something that mattered. But tonight had shown him how easy it was for good intentions to rot from the inside out when you weren't paying attention. How quickly power could corrupt, and how invisible suffering could be when you had too many layers of management between yourself and the truth. His phone buzzed. Janet's reply was characteristically efficient. Already on it. Draft policy changes attached. Also, the attorney's name is Patricia Kim. She's expensive but worth it. Sending her contact info now. Get some sleep, Daniel. You look like hell in that hoodie. He smiled despite himself. Janet had been with him since the food truck days, and she was one of the few people who could talk to him like that. Thanks, Janet. I owe you one. You owe me several. But who's counting? Daniel finished his coffee and left $300 on the table, more than enough to cover his meal and leave a substantial tip for whoever found it. As he walked out into the cool night air, he looked back at the diner through the window. It looked warm and inviting from the outside, with its neon sign and checkered curtains. You'd never know what kind of darkness had been hiding inside. Tomorrow, he'd start fixing it. Tomorrow, he'd listen to Clara's story and begin the work of making sure no one else in his company ever had to whisper their pain like she had. But tonight, he just stood there in the parking lot, letting the weight of it all settle on his shoulders. The responsibility, the failure, the opportunity to do better. His phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Janet. It was a text from an unknown number. Mr. Reed, this is Clara. Jen gave me your number. I hope that's okay. I just wanted to say thank you again. You have no idea what tonight meant to me. Sweet dreams. Daniel stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. Sweet dreams, Clara. And tomorrow, we start making things right. Together. He got in his car. a modest sedan he used for these undercover trips because his usual vehicles would have given him away instantly, and drove home through streets that were nearly empty at this hour. But his mind was full, churning with plans and possibilities, and the echo of a woman's voice saying, "Please don't hit me, I'm already hurt." By the time he pulled into his driveway, he'd made a decision. Haven's hospitality was about to undergo a major transformation, starting at the bottom and working its way up. New policies, new training, new management, and above all, a new culture that actually lived up to the values he'd claimed to build the company on. And Clara, the woman who'd been brave enough to whisper her truth in a room full of strangers, was going to be part of making that happen. He didn't know how yet, but he could feel it with the same certainty he'd felt when he'd first started his business. Some people came into your life and changed everything. Clara had done that tonight, though she probably didn't know it yet. He walked into his house, a sleek, modern place that felt too big and too empty most nights, and sat down at his kitchen table with his laptop. Sleep could wait. There was too much to do. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood. Daniel opened his laptop and pulled up the employee files for Haven's Diner Location 17. 32 people worked there, from dishwashers to line cooks to servers like Clara. Each file had a photo, basic information, and performance reviews written by Richard. He started reading, and the pattern became clear almost immediately. Richard's reviews were harsh and nitpicking for some employees, glowing and supportive for others. The harshest reviews all belonged to women, specifically women who looked vulnerable in their ID photos, women with tired eyes and forced smiles, women who probably needed the job too badly to complain. Clara's file was particularly brutal, frequently requires emotional support, overly sensitive to criticism, needs constant supervision. None of it matched what Daniel had observed tonight. Clara had been professional, hard-working, and remarkably composed considering what she was dealing with. He made a note to have all of Richard's reviews audited and potentially rewritten by an impartial third party. How many careers had this man damaged? How many people had he driven away from jobs they needed? Daniel's phone rang. It was nearly midnight, but he wasn't surprised to see Janet's name on the screen. She kept the same workaholic hours he did. "You're going to want to sit down for this," she said without preamble. "I'm already sitting." Richard Holbrook has filed complaints against 4 different employees in the past 6 months, all for supposedly stealing from the register. In every case, the employee was fired on the spot, and Richard personally handled the investigation. Daniel's blood ran cold. Let me guess. All 4 were women. All 4 were women. And here's the kicker. I pulled the security footage from those dates. In 3 out of 4 cases, the footage shows Richard himself taking money from the register and pocketing it. Then he blamed the nearest employee. He framed them. He framed them. And because he was the manager, nobody questioned it. The corporate office just processed the terminations and moved on. Daniel closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Find those 4 women. Offer them reinstatement with back pay and a formal apology. If they don't want to come back, offer them severance and excellent references. And Janet? Make sure they know this wasn't their fault. Already drafting the letters, Daniel. There's more. I've been going through complaints filed at other locations. There are patterns, not as bad as Richard, but there are at least 3 other managers who need to be investigated. Then investigate them. And Janet? From now on, I want direct access to all employee complaints. No filtering through HR, no sanitizing for my consumption. I want to see the raw reports. That's going to be a lot of reading. Then I'd better start now. They talked for another hour, going through policies and procedures, identifying weaknesses in the system that had allowed people like Richard to thrive. By the time they hung up, Daniel had a headache and a to-do list that would take months to complete. But he also had something else, a sense of purpose that had been missing for a while. He'd gotten so caught up in expansion and profit margins that he'd forgotten why he started this business in the first place: to create spaces where people felt valued, where hard work was rewarded and dignity was non-negotiable. Clara had reminded him of that tonight, not with grand speeches or accusations, but with 4 simple words: "I'm already hurt." Those words would haunt him, he knew. but they would also drive him to be better, to build better, to create a company where nobody ever had to beg not to be hurt again. He finally closed his laptop around 2 in the morning and headed to bed, but before he did, he sent one more text to Clara's number. "Thank you for your courage tonight. You changed more than you know." He didn't expect a response. It was late, and she was probably asleep, but his phone buzzed almost immediately. "I was afraid to speak up for so long. Thank you for making it safe to finally tell the truth. See you tomorrow." Daniel smiled and set his phone on the nightstand. Tomorrow would be the beginning of something new, for Clara, for Haven's hospitality, and for himself. He fell asleep thinking about second chances and the unexpected ways people came into your life exactly when you needed them most. Clara woke up the next morning to sunlight streaming through the gaps in her curtains. For a moment, she forgot where she was, forgot what had happened. Then it all came rushing back. The diner, Richard's hand on her wrist, the whispered plea that had slipped out before she could stop it. And Daniel, the billionaire, who'd sat in a corner booth and changed everything. She reached for her phone on the nightstand and saw his message from the early morning hours. "Thank you for your courage tonight. You changed more than you know." She read it 3 times, trying to convince herself it was real. Her apartment was small, just a studio with a kitchenette and a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. But it was hers, and she'd fought hard to keep it after leaving Marcus. The rent was due in 5 days, and before last night, she'd been $300 short. Now, thanks to Daniel's tip and the money he'd given her, she could pay it with something left over. She got out of bed and walked to the mirror hanging on the back of her bathroom door. The woman staring back at her looked tired, worn down by too many battles fought alone. But there was something different in her eyes this morning. A spark of something she'd thought was gone forever. Hope, maybe, or just the memory of what it felt like to have someone stand up for her. Her wrist was bruised where Richard had grabbed her, 5 finger-shaped marks in varying shades of purple and yellow. She touched them gently, remembering the pain, but also remembering the moment Daniel had said, "Let go of her." Now, the way his voice had cut through the chaos, like a promise that things could be different. Clara made herself a cup of instant coffee and sat at her tiny table, thinking about what she would say when she went back to the diner today. Daniel had asked for the truth, all of it, and she'd promised to give it to him. But where did you even start with a story like hers? She pulled out her phone and started typing notes, trying to organize her thoughts. The way Richard scheduled her for the worst shifts, the ones that ended at 2 in the morning when the buses had stopped running. The way he docked her pay for imaginary mistakes, $20 here, $30 there, always with a smirk that dared her to complain. The comments he made about her appearance, about her past, about the bruises she sometimes couldn't quite hide under her uniform. And then there were the things she'd witnessed him do to other employees. The way he screamed at Lisa, the new girl, until she cried during the lunch rush. The time he'd forced Miguel to work a double shift, even though Miguel's daughter was sick and needed to be picked up from school. The constant, grinding cruelty that had become so normal, she'd almost stopped noticing it. By the time she finished writing, she had 3 pages of notes, 3 pages of reasons why Richard should never have been in charge of anything, let alone people's livelihoods. She saved the document and stood up, feeling something she hadn't felt in months, a sense of purpose, a reason to believe that speaking up might actually matter. She showered and dressed carefully, choosing jeans and a sweater instead of her uniform. Daniel had said she was coming in as a witness, not a waitress, and she wanted to look like someone who deserved to be taken seriously. She covered the bruises on her wrist with a long-sleeved cardigan and pulled her hair back into a neat ponytail. The bus ride to the diner took 40 minutes, plenty of time for her nerves to kick in. What if Daniel had changed his mind? What if this was all some elaborate test and she was about to get fired anyway? What if nobody believed her? Or worse, what if they believed her but didn't care? She almost got off at the stop before the diner, almost turned around and went home. But then she thought about Jen and Lisa and Miguel and all the other people still working under managers like Richard at other locations. If she stayed silent now, she'd be abandoning them, and she'd spent too much of her life being silent already. The diner looked different in the daylight, less romantic, more worn around the edges. Clara could see the cracks in the parking lot pavement, The faded paint on the window frames, the way the neon sign flickered, even though it was turned off. This place had seen better days, but it had also been her lifeline when she'd had nowhere else to turn. She pushed through the door and found the morning shift in full swing. Breakfast customers filled most of the booths, and the smell of bacon and coffee hung thick in the air. Jen was behind the counter, and when she saw Clara, her face lit up. "There she is," Jen called out, hurrying over. "How are you feeling? Did you sleep okay?" "I'm okay," Clara said, and it was only half a lie. "Is Daniel here?" "In the back office. He got here about an hour ago and has been on the phone ever since. Go on back. He's expecting you." Clara made her way through the kitchen, nodding to the cooks who looked up as she passed. The office was tucked in the far corner, a cramped space barely big enough for a desk and 2 chairs. Daniel was sitting at the desk, his phone pressed to his ear, and he looked exactly like what he was, a man who'd barely slept. He glanced up when she knocked on the open door, and his whole expression softened. He held up one finger, asking her to wait, then wrapped up his call quickly. "Janet, I'll call you back. Clara just arrived." He hung up and stood, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Good morning. How are you?" "I'm fine," Clara said automatically, then caught herself. "Actually, no. I'm nervous, and I didn't sleep much. But I'm here." Daniel smiled. "Honesty. Good. That's exactly what I need from you today." He sat back down and pulled out a tablet. "I want to record your statement, if that's okay. It'll be confidential, used only for the internal investigation, but I need it documented properly." Clara nodded and settled into her chair. Her notes were folded in her pocket, but she found she didn't need them. Once she started talking, the words came easily. All the things she'd been holding inside for months poured out in a steady stream. Daniel listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each new revelation. When she finally finished, almost an hour later, her throat was dry and her hands were shaking, but she also felt lighter, like she'd been carrying a weight she hadn't realized was there until it was gone. Daniel set down his tablet and rubbed his face. "Clara, I need to apologize to you." She blinked. "For what?" "For not knowing. For building a system where this kind of abuse could happen unchecked. For being so disconnected from the ground level that I had no idea what my employees were going through." He looked at her directly, his eyes heavy with something that might have been guilt. "You shouldn't have had to endure any of that, and the fact that you did, in a business with my name on it, that's on me." "You didn't know," Clara said quietly. "I should have known. That's my job, and I failed at it." He leaned forward, his voice urgent. "But I'm going to make this right, Clara. Not just for you, but for everyone. Richard is finished in this industry. The other managers Jen mentioned. They're being investigated as of this morning, and I'm implementing new policies across all Haven's locations to make sure nothing like this happens again." "What kind of policies?" "Anonymous reporting systems, regular third-party audits, mandatory management training focused on respect and ethics, surprise visits from corporate, not announced weeks in advance so people can put on a show, and most importantly, direct lines of communication between staff and upper management that bypass the people who might be causing the problems." Clara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "You're really going to do all that?" "I'm really going to do all that, and I want your help." She stared at him. "My help? I'm just a waitress. You're someone who knows exactly what's broken because you've lived through it. That makes you more valuable than any consultant I could hire." Daniel pulled up something on his tablet and turned it to face her. It was a job description, Hospitality Experience Coordinator. "I'm creating a new position, someone who travels to different locations, talks to staff confidentially, identifies problems before they become crises, and helps implement solutions. The pay is $60,000 a year plus benefits, with travel expenses covered. I want you to take it. If you've ever been in Clara's position, if you've ever felt invisible or voiceless at work, drop a comment below. Share your story. You're not alone, and your experience matters." Clara couldn't speak. $60,000 a year. That was more than twice what she'd been making at the diner. That was enough to move to a better apartment, to save money, to finally stop living one emergency away from disaster. "I don't have any qualifications," she finally managed. You have the only qualification that matters. You understand what it's like to be on the receiving end of bad management, and you care enough to want to fix it. Daniel closed the tablet. Obviously, you don't have to decide right now. Think about it. Talk to people you trust. But Clara, I meant what I said last night. You reminded me what strength looks like, and I think you could help a lot of people if you wanted to. She wiped at her eyes, embarrassed by the tears that were falling now despite her best efforts. Can I ask you something? How? Anything. Why did you really come to the diner that night? I know you said you heard rumors, but there are 37 Havens locations. Why ours specifically? Daniel was quiet for a moment. Because 3 weeks ago, one of your co-workers, a woman named Beth, tried to file a complaint about Richard through the proper channels. It got buried in HR, dismissed as a personality conflict. She quit the next day, and nobody followed up to find out why. When I was reviewing quarterly reports, I saw the turnover rate at this location was nearly twice the company average. That's usually a sign of a management problem, so I decided to see for myself. You came because of Beth? I came because something was clearly wrong, and I needed to understand what. Beth's complaint was the tip-off, but the problem was obviously bigger than one incident. He paused. Do you know where Beth is now? I'd like to make things right with her too. She's working at the grocery store on 5th Street. She took a pay cut because she couldn't stand being here anymore. Daniel made a note. I'll reach out to her. And Clara, I'm sorry that she tried to get help and the system failed her. That's another thing that's going to change. They talked for another hour, going over details and logistics. Daniel wanted Clara to start documenting everything she could remember, not just about Richard, but about the overall culture at the diner, what worked, what didn't, what made employees feel valued or dismissed. It was strange, being asked her opinion like it mattered, like she was an expert instead of just someone trying to survive. When they finally finished, Clara felt wrung out but oddly energized. She stood to leave, then hesitated. Daniel, thank you for everything, for listening, for believing me, for giving me a chance to be part of the solution instead of just another victim of the problem. He stood too, and for a moment she thought he might hug her. Instead, he extended his hand formally. Thank you for trusting me with your story. I won't let you down. His handshake was firm and warm, and Clara held on maybe a second longer than necessary. There was something about him that made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt since before Marcus. It wasn't romantic, not exactly, more like recognition, like he saw her as a whole person instead of just a problem to be managed or a body to fill a shift. She left the office and found Jen waiting near the kitchen door. So, how'd it go? He offered me a job, Clara said, still not quite believing it. Jen's eyes went wide. What kind of job? Clara explained as they walked to a quiet corner booth. With each word, Jen's smile grew bigger. That's amazing. Are you going to take it? I don't know. It seems too good to be true. What if I'm terrible at it? What if I let everyone down? Clara, Jen grabbed both her hands across the table. You just spent an hour telling the CEO of a major company exactly what's wrong with how it treats people. If that's not the perfect preparation for a job helping to fix those problems, I don't know what is. But I don't have any experience with corporate stuff. I don't know how to write reports or give presentations or any of that. So you'll learn. You think Daniel was born knowing how to run a restaurant chain? He started with a food truck, according to that article I read about him last night. Everyone starts somewhere. Clara smiled despite her doubts. You looked him up? Of course I looked him up. I wanted to make sure he wasn't some creep pretending to be a billionaire. Jen pulled out her phone and showed Clara the screen. It was an article from a business magazine with Daniel's photo. He looked different in the picture, more polished, wearing an expensive suit instead of a hoodie, but his eyes were the same. Intelligent, kind, a little sad around the edges. He's legit, Jen continued. Started Havens Hospitality 8 years ago. Grew it from nothing. There are interviews where he talks about wanting to create jobs that treat people with dignity. Looks like he actually meant it. Clara read through the article, learning details about Daniel she hadn't known. He'd grown up in foster care, bouncing between homes until he aged out of the system at 18. The food truck had been his attempt to create the kind of stability he'd never had as a kid. Every article mentioned his reputation for being hands-on, for caring about his employees, for building a company culture based on respect, which made Richard's behavior even more of a betrayal. He'd taken everything Daniel was trying to build and twisted it into something ugly. "I think I'm going to take the job," Clara said slowly. Jen squeezed her hands. "Good, because honestly, you'd be perfect at it. You actually care about people. That's rarer than you'd think, especially in corporate." They sat together for a while longer, drinking coffee and talking about everything and nothing. Other employees came by to check on Clara, to share their own Richard stories, to express amazement that someone had finally stood up to him. The mood in the diner was different today, lighter, like everyone could finally breathe properly. Around noon, Daniel emerged from the office and gathered the staff together. "I know you all have questions about what happens next," he said, "so here's what I can tell you. Richard will not be returning, ever. We're bringing in an interim manager from another location, someone with an excellent track record of treating staff well. Her name is Patricia, and she'll be here tomorrow to start getting to know everyone. In the meantime, Jen, you're in charge." Jen's jaw dropped. "Me? You've been here the longest, and from what I've observed, people respect you. It's temporary, just until Patricia gets up to speed, but I trust you to keep things running smoothly." He went on to outline the policy changes he'd mentioned to Clara, emphasizing that every employee's voice mattered. People could report problems without fear of retaliation. Management would be held accountable. Things were going to be different. When he finished, the room erupted in applause. Not the polite, obligatory kind, but genuine appreciation. Daniel looked embarrassed by the attention, but he also looked pleased. Like this was what he'd wanted all along. This sense of people working together instead of against each other. As the crowd dispersed, Daniel caught Clara's eye and gestured for her to follow him outside. They stood in the parking lot, the autumn sun warm on their faces. "I have a meeting downtown in an hour," he said. "But before I go, I wanted to ask if you'd thought any more about the job offer." "I want to take it," Clara said, "if the offer's still open." His face broke into a genuine smile. "It's still open, and I'm glad, really glad." He pulled out his phone. "Give me your email. I'll have Janet send over the formal offer letter and all the paperwork. You can start as soon as you're ready. 2 weeks, a month, whatever you need." 2 weeks, Clara said. "I want to help Jen with the transition here first. Make sure everything's stable before I leave." "That's thoughtful of you, and typical from what I'm learning about you." Daniel pocketed his phone. "Clara, I know last night was traumatic, and I know this is all happening fast, but I want you to understand something. You're not getting this job because I feel sorry for you. You're getting it because you're exactly the kind of person I need in this role. Someone who's been through the fire and came out still caring about other people." Clara felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I won't let you down. I know you won't." He hesitated, then added, "And if you ever need anything, professional or personal, you have my number now. Don't hesitate to use it." There was something in his eyes when he said it, something that made Clara's heart beat a little faster. But before she could analyze it, he was walking to his car, calling out a goodbye over his shoulder. She watched him drive away, this man who'd stumbled into her life at exactly the right moment and changed everything. Or maybe it wasn't stumbling at all. Maybe it was something else. Something that felt almost like fate, though Clara had stopped believing in fate a long time ago. She went back inside and helped with the lunch rush, taking orders and bussing tables alongside everyone else. But her mind was elsewhere, imagining what her new life might look like, traveling to different Havens locations, meeting people, hearing their stories, helping to solve problems before they became crises, using her pain for something good instead of just carrying it around like dead weight. By the time her shift ended, she was exhausted but hopeful. She said goodbye to Jen and the others, promising to be back tomorrow, and caught the bus home. Her apartment didn't feel quite as small when she walked through the door this time. It felt like a launching pad, a place she was living for now but wouldn't be stuck in forever. She made herself dinner, actual dinner instead of ramen or canned soup, and sat down to write her resignation letter from her current position. 2 weeks' notice, professional and courteous, thanking them for the opportunity even though she'd been miserable most of the time. Her phone buzzed, an email from Janet with the job offer attached. Clara opened it and read through every word twice, making sure it was real. Salary, benefits, start date, job description, all of it exactly as Daniel had promised. At the bottom was a note. Welcome to the Havens family. The real one, not the broken version you've experienced. Looking forward to working with you, Janet. Clara saved the document and leaned back in her chair, letting herself feel it all. The relief, the excitement, the bone-deep gratitude that someone had finally listened, finally cared, finally done something about the injustice she'd been living with for so long. And underneath it all, something else. A warmth that bloomed in her chest whenever she thought about Daniel, the way he'd stood up for her, the way he listened like her words mattered, the way his smile reached his eyes when she'd said yes to the job. It was too soon to call it anything more than gratitude and respect. She'd just gotten out of a terrible relationship with Marcus. She needed time to heal, time to find herself again without someone else's darkness weighing her down. But maybe, eventually, when she was stronger and more sure of herself, there might be room for something else, something gentle and patient and kind. Something that looked a little like the way Daniel's eyes had softened when he said, "You reminded me what strength looks like." For now, though, she had a future to build, a job that mattered, a chance to help people who were where she'd been just yesterday, and that was more than enough. Clara fell asleep that night with her phone on the nightstand, Daniel's number saved in her contacts. She didn't know if she'd ever use it for anything beyond work, but knowing it was there, knowing she had someone in her corner who actually cared about doing the right thing, that made all the difference. Tomorrow would be the start of something new. Tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after that. 3 months later, Clara stood in the parking lot of Havens Diner location 23, checking her notes one last time before heading inside. This was her 8th visit since taking the job as Hospitality Experience Coordinator, and she'd developed a routine. Arrive unannounced during a busy shift, observe for an hour, talk to staff members individually, listen to what they weren't saying as much as what they were. She'd learned so much in these 3 months. How to read body language, how to ask questions that got past rehearsed answers, how to spot the signs of a toxic workplace before they became full-blown crises, and most importantly, how to help people feel heard without making promises she couldn't keep. Her phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "How's location 23 looking?" Janet mentioned some concerns about the night manager there. Clara smiled and typed back, "Just arrived. We'll report back after I've talked to the staff." They texted often now, sometimes about work, sometimes about nothing in particular. Daniel had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, and he asked about her life in a way that felt genuine rather than obligatory. "Are you sleeping better? Have you found a good therapist yet? Did you end up taking that painting class you mentioned?" She had found a therapist, actually, a kind woman named Dr. Rodriguez who specialized in trauma recovery. The sessions were hard, forcing Clara to confront things she'd rather leave buried. But they were also helping. The nightmares about Marcus had become less frequent. The constant anxiety that used to follow her everywhere had started to ease. Clara pushed through the diner door and was immediately hit with the familiar chaos. Lunch rush in full swing, servers weaving between tables, the kitchen shouting out orders. She chose a booth near the back and settled in to watch. Within 20 minutes, she'd identified 3 problems. The night manager Janet had mentioned, a man named Kevin, kept making unnecessary physical contact with the female servers. A hand on the shoulder here, a touch on the lower back there. Nothing overtly inappropriate, but enough to make the women uncomfortable. You could see it in the way they tensed up when he approached, the way they found excuses to be somewhere else. The second problem was subtler. The kitchen staff and the servers barely communicated, and when they did, it was tense and hostile. Someone had drawn a line between front of house and back of house, and nobody was crossing it. The third problem was the newest server, a young man who couldn't have been more than 19. He was struggling, forgetting orders and mixing up tables, and instead of helping him, the other servers were rolling their eyes and leaving him to drown. Clara made notes on her tablet, then caught the eye of one of the servers, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes. "Excuse me, could I get a coffee when you have a moment?" "Of course, honey." The woman returned quickly with a pot and a cup. "Anything else?" "Actually, yes. I'm Clara, from corporate. I'm here to check in with staff about how things are going. Would you have time to talk with me privately after your shift?" The woman's expression shifted from friendly to guarded. "Am I in trouble?" "Not at all, I promise. I'm not here to get anyone fired. I'm here to listen and hopefully make things better." The woman studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "My name's Diane. I get off at 3. "Perfect. I'll be here." Clara spent the next few hours having similar conversations with other staff members. Some were skeptical, some were eager to talk, some were scared. But she'd gotten good at putting people at ease, at making them believe that their words actually mattered. By the time Diane sat down across from her at 3:15, Clara had a clear picture of what was happening at location 23, and it wasn't good. "Kevin's the problem," Diane said. Once Clara had assured her the conversation was confidential. "He's not as bad as some managers I've worked under, but he's got wandering hands and a short temper. Most of us just try to stay out of his way." "Has anyone reported him?" Diane laughed bitterly. "To who?" "His boss is the regional manager, and those two are buddies. They golf together on weekends. Nobody wants to be the one who rocks the boat." Clara made a note. "What about the tension between kitchen and servers?" "That's Kevin too. He keeps telling the kitchen staff that servers are lazy and entitled, and he tells us that the cooks are incompetent and slow. He's got us all thinking the worst of each other, so we're too busy fighting amongst ourselves to notice that he's the real problem." "And the new server? The young guy who was struggling?" "That's Josh. Sweet kid, but he's in over his head. Kevin hired him because his mom used to work here, but he didn't bother training him properly. Just threw him on the floor during a rush and expected him to figure it out." Clara talked with Diane for another hour, getting details, gathering evidence. Then she spoke with 3 other employees, each of whom confirmed Diane's account. The picture was consistent. Kevin wasn't an obvious monster like Richard had been, but he was slowly poisoning the workplace with his manipulation and inappropriate behavior. By the time Clara left location 23, it was almost 6 in the evening. She sat in her car and called Daniel. "How bad is it?" he asked without preamble. "Bad enough that Kevin needs to go. But there's more to it than that. The whole culture there is broken. People don't trust each other, they don't communicate, and they're all just trying to survive until their shift ends." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Can it be fixed?" "Yes, but it's going to take more than just firing Kevin. We need to bring in someone who can rebuild team cohesion, maybe do some group training sessions on communication and respect. And we need to make sure Josh gets proper mentoring instead of being left to fail." "Done. Send me your full report and I'll start making calls." "Clara?" "Yeah? You're really good at this. I hope you know that." She felt warmth spread through her chest. "Thanks. That means a lot coming from you." "I mean it. Janet was just telling me this morning that employee satisfaction scores have gone up 15% across all the locations you visited. You're making a real difference." They talked for a few more minutes, making plans for how to handle location 23. Then Daniel said something that made Clara's heart skip a beat. "Hey, I'm in town next week for a conference. I was wondering if you'd want to grab dinner. Nothing fancy, just 2 colleagues catching up. But if you'd rather keep things strictly professional, I completely understand." Clara's first instinct was to say no. It was too soon. She wasn't ready. She needed more time to heal before even thinking about anything that might resemble a date. But then she thought about the past 3 months, the way Daniel had supported her from a distance, respecting her boundaries while still making it clear he cared, the way he never pushed, never demanded more than she was ready to give, the way he made her laugh during their late-night text conversations about everything and nothing. "Dinner sounds nice," she heard herself say, "as long as we can go somewhere with really good dessert." "Deal. I'll send you details once I figure out my schedule." After they hung up, Clara sat in her car for a long time, thinking about how much her life had changed in just 3 months. She had a job she loved, a purpose that got her out of bed in the morning. She had an apartment that didn't feel like a trap anymore. She had a therapist who was helping her untangle years of trauma and self-doubt. And maybe, just maybe, she had the beginning of something else. Something that scared her and excited her in equal measure. Something with a man who'd seen her at her absolute lowest and still thought she was worth standing up for. Have you ever met someone who changed the trajectory of your entire life? Someone who showed up at exactly the right moment and reminded you that good people still exist? Share your story in the comments, because we all need to hear that hope is real. The week passed in a blur of visits and reports and phone calls. Clara met with staff at 3 more locations, identifying problems and proposing solutions. She attended her therapy session and talked about her upcoming dinner with Daniel, working through her anxiety about letting someone new into her life. "What scares you most about it?" Dr. Rodriguez asked. "That I'll mess it up, that I'm not healed enough, that I'll bring all my trauma into something that could be good and ruin it before it even starts." "Or," Dr. Rodriguez said gently, "you could trust that Daniel knows what he's getting into. He's seen you at your worst, Clara. He knows your history, and he still wants to have dinner with you. Maybe that's exactly the kind of acceptance you need. Someone who sees all of you, broken pieces included, and doesn't run away." Clara thought about that as she got ready for dinner on Friday evening. She chose a simple blue dress and minimal makeup, wanting to look nice without trying too hard. Her hands shook a little as she applied lipstick, but it was nerves, not fear. There was a difference. Daniel had chosen a small Italian restaurant on the edge of town, the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles. He was already there when she arrived, standing up as she approached the table. He looked different than he had at the diner, more polished, wearing slacks and a button-down shirt instead of a hoodie. But his smile was the same, warm and genuine and just a little bit shy. "You look beautiful," he said as she sat down. "You clean up pretty well yourself." Clara felt some of her nervousness ease. This was just Daniel, the man who'd stood up for her when nobody else would. There was nothing to be afraid of. They ordered wine and appetizers, falling into easy conversation. Daniel told her about the conference, about boring presentations and networking events that felt like torture for an introvert like him. Clara shared stories from her location visits, the challenges and small victories. "I got an email from Diane yesterday," Clara said. "From location 23. She said Kevin's replacement is amazing. The whole atmosphere there has shifted. People are actually smiling at work." Daniel raised his glass. "That's because of you. You identified the problem and helped fix it. We fixed it together. True, but you're the one in the trenches. I'm just the guy who signs off on the decisions." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "Clara, I need to tell you something, and I want you to know there's absolutely no pressure attached to it, okay?" Her heart started beating faster. "Okay, that night at the diner, when I heard you say, 'Please don't hit me,' I'm already hurt. Something inside me broke. But it wasn't just anger at Richard or guilt about failing as a boss. It was something more personal." He looked down at his glass, then back up at her. "My mother used to say those exact words to my father when I was a kid. I'd hear her through the walls of whatever foster home I was in before they finally took me away for good. And all my life, I've carried this guilt that I didn't do anything to help her. I was just a scared little boy, but that didn't make the guilt any less real." Clara reached across the table and took his hand. "Daniel, when I heard you say those words, it was like the universe was giving me a second chance, a chance to be the person I wished someone had been for my mother, to stand up for someone who needed it, to make it right, even if it was decades too late and for a different person entirely." His fingers tightened around hers. "So thank you for letting me help you, for giving me that chance to be better than the scared kid I used to be." Tears pricked at Clara's eyes. "You didn't just help me, you saved me. I was drowning, and you threw me a lifeline when I'd stopped believing lifelines existed." They sat there for a moment, hands clasped across the table, two people who'd found each other in the midst of their own separate storms. The waiter brought their entrees, breaking the moment. They ate and talked and laughed, the conversation flowing naturally from heavy topics to lighter ones. Daniel told her about his early days with the food truck, the disasters and near misses that had somehow turned into success. Clara shared stories from before everything went wrong with Marcus, reminding herself that she'd had a life before him, that she could have a life after him. By the time dessert arrived, a chocolate lava cake, they decided to share. Clara felt lighter than she had in years. Not because her problems had disappeared, but because she was finally allowing herself to believe that better things were possible. "Can I be honest about something?" Daniel asked as they split the last bite of cake. "Always. I asked you to dinner as colleagues, and I meant that. But Clara, I also asked because I wanted to spend time with you, not as your boss or your ally in fixing broken workplaces, just as someone who finds you fascinating and brave and wonderful." He paused. "But I also know you're healing from something terrible, and I don't want to push you into anything you're not ready for. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'm interested, genuinely interested, but I'm also willing to wait until you're ready, however long that takes." Clara felt tears threaten again, but these were good tears, happy tears. "I'm interested too," she said softly, "and I'm scared. But Dr. Rodriguez keeps telling me that being scared doesn't mean I'm not ready. It just means I'm being brave enough to try something that matters." Daniel smiled. "Smart woman, you're Dr. Rodriguez." "She is, and she's also the one who pointed out that you've already seen me at my worst. You've seen me broken and terrified and whispering my pain in front of a room full of strangers. And you didn't run away. That's rare. That's special. You're special," Daniel said. "And I want to be clear about something. I'm not trying to rescue you or fix you. You're already doing that work yourself, and I'm in awe of how strong you are. What I am trying to do is be a partner, someone who walks beside you, not in front of you or behind you. Is that something you might want?" Clara thought about it, really thought about it. 3 months ago, the answer would have been no. 3 months ago, she was still too raw, too broken, too convinced that she didn't deserve good things. But 3 months was a lifetime when you were doing the hard work of healing. 3 months of therapy and meaningful work, and slowly learning to trust herself again. 3 months of watching Daniel prove, again and again, that he was exactly who he seemed to be. Kind, patient, genuine. "Yes," she said finally, "that's something I might want, but I need to take it slow, really slow. No rushing, no pressure, no expectations beyond just getting to know each other." "Slow is perfect," Daniel said. "Slow is wonderful. I've waited 36 years to meet someone like you. I can wait as long as you need." They left the restaurant hand in hand, walking slowly to where they'd parked. The night air was cool and clear, and Clara could see stars above the city lights. She felt like she was standing at the beginning of something new, something that might turn out to be beautiful if she was brave enough to let it. "Can I call you tomorrow?" Daniel asked when they reached her car. "I'd like that." He hesitated, then leaned in slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wanted. But she didn't want to. She let him kiss her cheek, soft and chaste and full of promise. "Good night, Clara." "Good night, Daniel." She drove home with butterflies in her stomach and hope in her heart. The future was uncertain, healing wasn't linear, and there would be hard days ahead. But for the first time in years, she was looking forward to tomorrow, and the day after that, and all the days that might come. 6 months later, Clara stood in the main conference room at Haven's hospitality headquarters, presenting her findings to the board of directors. She'd visited all 37 locations now, some of them multiple times. She'd interviewed hundreds of employees, identified dozens of problems, and helped implement solutions that were actually working. Employee satisfaction was up 23% company-wide. Turnover had dropped by nearly half. Several former employees, including Beth from location 17, had come back to the company after hearing about the changes. And most importantly, people felt heard. They felt valued. They felt like their workplace was somewhere they could thrive, instead of just survive. Daniel sat at the head of the table, watching her with unconcealed pride as she walked through her presentation. They'd been officially dating for 4 months now, taking things slowly just as Clara had asked. There had been bumps along the way, moments when her trauma responses kicked in and she pulled away without meaning to, times when Daniel's own childhood wounds surfaced and made him afraid he wasn't doing enough. But they worked through it. They talked. They went to couples counseling together, both agreeing that they wanted to build something healthy from the ground up. They learned each other's triggers and patterns and how to support each other without trying to fix each other. And somewhere along the way, Clara had fallen in love. Not the desperate, clinging love she'd mistaken for affection with Marcus, but something steadier, deeper, the kind of love that felt like coming home. When she finished her presentation, the board members applauded. Several of them had questions, which she answered with growing confidence. This was her calling, she realized, helping people, making workplaces better, using her pain for something good. After the meeting, Daniel caught up with her in the hallway. "You were incredible in there. I was nervous. You didn't show it. Clara, the board wants to expand your program. They want to hire 2 more coordinators to work under you. You'd be managing a whole team." Her eyes went wide. "Really? Really? You'd be creating the blueprint for how Haven's hospitality treats its people. That's huge." Clara felt overwhelmed in the best possible way. A year ago, she'd been a waitress counting pennies and flinching at loud noises. Now she was being offered the chance to shape policy for an entire company, to turn her trauma into transformation for hundreds of people. "I want to do it," she said, "but I'm going to need help, training, support. You'll have all of that and more." Daniel glanced around to make sure they were alone, then pulled her into a hug. "I'm so proud of you. You've come so far." She hugged him back, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne. "We've come so far. This wouldn't have happened without you believing in me. You did the work, Clara. I just opened the door. You're the one who walked through it." That night, they celebrated at Daniel's house. He'd cooked dinner, something he'd gotten surprisingly good at over the past few months. They ate on his back patio, watching the sun set over the city. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said as they finished dessert. "Anything." That night at the diner, did you have any idea this was where we'd end up? You and me? Together? Daniel thought about it. "Honestly, no. I was just trying to do the right thing in the moment. But looking back, I think some part of me recognized you immediately, recognized your strength, your resilience, the light you were trying so hard to hide. And I wanted to protect that light, even if I didn't understand why it mattered so much. I'm glad you did. I'm glad you stood up when nobody else would. You changed my life, Daniel. You reminded me that I deserved better than what I'd settled for. You reminded me why I started this business in the first place, to create spaces where people feel valued. We saved each other, Clara. That's what makes this work." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out. 2 people who'd found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. A billionaire who'd forgotten what he was building for. A waitress who'd forgotten what she was worth. Both of them lost in different ways until they collided in a chaotic diner on a Tuesday night. Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here, the pain and fear and moments when she'd wanted to give up, but also the hope, the slowly building belief that things could be different, the courage it took to whisper her truth in front of strangers and trust that someone would listen. "I love you," she said, the words surprising both of them. Daniel's face lit up. "I love you too. I've been wanting to say it for weeks, but I didn't want to pressure you." "No pressure, just truth. You're the best thing that's happened to me in a very long time." He reached across the table and took her hand. "You're the best thing that's happened to me, period." They stayed outside until the night got too cold, then moved inside to curl up on the couch. Clara felt safe in his arms, something she'd never thought she'd feel with anyone again. The future stretched out ahead of them, uncertain but full of possibility. And as she drifted off to sleep, surrounded by warmth and love and the steady rhythm of Daniel's heartbeat, Clara thought about how far she'd come. From a woman too scared to speak up to someone who helped others find their voices. From someone who whispered, "Please don't hit me, I'm already hurt," to someone who could stand in front of a boardroom and demand better for everyone. The road hadn't been easy. Healing never was. But she'd walked it anyway, one step at a time, with people who believed in her lighting the way. And that made all the difference. Sometimes life places people in our path exactly when we need them most. Not to rescue us, but to remind us that we're worth fighting for. That kindness still exists. That broken things can be healed if we're brave enough to do the work. Clara had learned that lesson the hard way. But she'd learned it. and now she was spending her life making sure other people learned it too. That nobody should ever have to beg not to be hurt. That every person deserves dignity and respect, and the chance to build something better. That's the real lesson here. Not that billionaires swoop in and save the day, but that each of us has the power to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard, even when it costs us something, even when we're scared. Because somewhere out there, someone is waiting for their Daniel, someone to say, let go of her when the world is crushing them, someone to believe them when they finally find the courage to speak. Be that person for someone. Stand up, speak out, make the world a little bit kinder, one moment at a time. That's how we change things. That's how we heal. Together. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about love, resilience, and the power of human kindness. Drop a comment telling me what lesson you're taking away from Clara and Daniel's story. And remember, no matter what you're going through right now, you deserve better. You deserve respect. You deserve love. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise. Thank you for watching. And remember, every ending is just a new beginning waiting to happen.